So we're recording it for people who aren't here, which is why I'm standing up here. But I would love to just be more intimate, but just so that we can, accommodate different needs. So welcome. This is I found preparing for this really fun. So the way we're going to work this tonight is that we're going to start with Yossi, who's our Corin guy, and can explain to us a little bit why the shul chose this Seder and also how to use it, because it is a fantastic resource. But I really want to thank Yossi for coming out here and sharing his time and knowledge with all of us. So
thank you. Thank you, Atara. I am. What do I need to stay on the stool? Is that the only way to be in my head? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Hi. So first, we should certainly recognize before we start that the Sidurim themselves were donated to HI by Jade and Josh Grauer in memory of Rabbi Mari Grauer, the previous rabbi of the synagogue before Rabbi Martyr. So they really were generous in their donation and enabled us to do that. So what I wanted to do in as brief and as efficient a way as I can, which is going to be challenging because I love talking about this, but I think Rabbanit Atara loves talking about this. Some people in this room know that I love talking about this. Is to try to introduce us both to Corin, to why the synagogue chose to get Koren Siddur and why we chose the particular one that we did. But I want to start with a very quick story, which is about 9 years ago and change, when I was flown over to Israel to interview for the job that I have now at Corin. And I was there for 2 days. It was the shortest trip I've ever had to Israel. And I had gotten the sense that the things were going well, that I probably had the job. But that will inform what happened. And some people were telling me about this new series of Sidurim they were going to be making that were educational, that would be used in schools, that would really sort of change the way people approached davening. And I said, wow, that sounds really great. And then there was a mincha minyan there, and I'm standing at this mincha minyan, and there's a printer right next to me. And during Chazarat Hashatz, this page comes off of the printer, and I, without really thinking about the fact that I probably shouldn't be looking at things coming off of a printer at a place I don't yet work, took the page off the printer, and I looked at it, and what it turned out to be, and I looked at it, and then after Mincha, I asked whether this was what part of what they were talking about, and they said yes, it was, and I said, at that moment, I said, wow, this is really a game changer, the way this is. And what it turned out to be was a page spread from the Koren tefila Siddur the weekday version, which was done mostly by Rabbi Dr. Jay Goldmans, who I've gotten a chance to know, and who's a really incredible educator and thinker, especially around tefila and tefila education. So with that, so to understand that that's sort of how this, what we're using, the Siddur that we use that we now have in the synagogue is the Shabbat version of the tefila Siddur, also made primarily by Rabbi Goldmans. So I'm going to start. Everybody has the papers that I gave? Okay, so almost everything, I think everything in here is in the book itself, and I think I noted most of the pages, not on the first page as much, but mostly I noted the pages. But again, I hope it's large enough because I manipulated the sources a little bit. So the first question is just why Corin, right? We know that in we had different Sidurim here. Many synagogues have had many different Sidurim over the years. So very quickly, why would the synagogue choose Corin? The main reason, I think, is because Corin represents a modern and Zionist Orthodox approach to Judaism and to tefillah. So that's in general Corin. You can see in the bottom of that first page, I just put in from the table of contents, prayer for Israel and the Israel Defense Forces. That is, you can find that in every Koren Siddur. That's always part of it. The idea that we think about Medina Israel is something very important, and that's a big part of it. The very, very brief history of Corin is that in 1962, Eliyahu Koren Zichrono Livracha, who was the founder of Corin Publishers, released the Corin Tanakh, which was the first Tanakh to be produced, researched, produced, printed in the state of Israel after its founding. That was really important to him, that all Bibles, all Hebrew Bibles until that point had been produced outside of the land of Israel. And the state of Israel. And so he thought that was a really important thing. He did a lot of work on, a lot of research. The Tanakh isn't our topic tonight. But later on, in 1981, he released the Koren Siddur, which sort of took some of the same ideas of publication, of layout, of fonts. That's one of the things that we'll talk about in a second. One of the things that was very important to him was how the prayers would look. And he wrote a very well-known introduction to the Siddur that's I believe been translated in some of the Koren Siddurim to say, that the form of the Siddur can influence the way people pray. That if we set the text up in a way that's beautiful and in a way that is that helps people to read the words and to understand the words through different phrasing and things like that, then we can help them to have a better approach in their tefillah. So on the top of page 1, you see a section from Baruch She'amar from the beginning of Pesukei Zimra. I know we're focused mostly on amidah tonight, but for the why Corin part, it's a little bit from different places. So the first thing you see is the Hebrew typeface, the Corin font. That's another piece that makes Corin unique and significant. Eliyahu Koren worked very, very hard on 2 different fonts. One was the Koren Tanakh font, which is used in the Tanakh as well as for biblical quotes in the Siddur, and then the Koren Siddur font, which is similar but a little bit different. So piece 1 is the fonts. You can also see one of the things that I chose this section for is to see that layout. One of the things that is a hallmark of Corin, as I mentioned, is the idea of using the layout to help people understand things. And so a lot of the prayers, not all of them, but a lot of the pages of the Siddurim, rather than being a block of text with justification, right? Everybody remember, like when you do things on Microsoft Word, justification is when the ends of the sides line up with the margins, right, on every line. And so there's like microscopic little spacing differences that are done so that everything can line up neatly, which is very nice and very attractive in a lot of ways. But what you don't get is a sense of phrasing. And so part of the idea of the way Corin lays out the Siddur is to put phrases into places that will help you to slow down, to understand, to read it. I chose this specific one. I don't remember if Rabbi Goldman mentions it in the Shabbat Siddur, but he mentions it in the weekday Siddur. That again, this is part of like a much more longer excursus here. But after that initial line of Baruch She'amar B'haya Olam Baruch Hu, you can see actually from starting with Baruch Hu, there's 10 Baruchs, right? The Baruch She'amar B'haya Olam is sort of an introduction, and there's 10 Baruchs. And there's a suggestion here that, okay, we have a nice sort of rhythm of the saying Baruch, 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 blessed is God for all these things, but that the 10 might be connected to the 10 utterances that create the world that the Mishnah talks about. There's an interesting parallel because the end of Pesukei Zimra has the last of the Hallelujah, of the last Psalm in the book of Psalms. We all know Hallelujah, Hallel B'Kodsho, and has the word Hallelujah, I believe, 10 times. So there's like this interesting bracketing and bookending of that. Again, there's way more to say about it. I just wanted to sort of show that there's a way in which the layout can teach us things. I don't know if you can see it, but another piece in the Baruch She'amar that I wanted to show is just a quick note, which is that because Corin really wanted the prayers, wanted people to find it easy to pronounce the prayers. So a distinction was made. I'm pretty sure, but I'm not certain, that Corin was the first Siddur to have a distinction between the Shvana and Shvanach and the Kamat Gadol and Kamat Katan. I will explain what those are. Right, the Shva is the vowel that is 2 dots. Right, if you look under the word, again, it's very small. I apologize. If you want to look V'oseh in the 5th line, right? You can see those two dots. That's a shva, right? The shva na is a shva that makes a sound. I think there's I think it's like the furtive shva. No, I might be getting it wrong. There's a fancy word for it. But there's two types of shvas depending on how things are. It's either pronounced or it's not pronounced. It either sort of ends a syllable or can begin one. And so the shva na, the one that makes a sound, is a little bit thicker and darker in the Koren Siddur. And a shva na, a resting shva, a shva that ends, that has no sound, that's silent, is a little bit thinner, less bold-faced. So you could see an example of that one again if you're looking at that on Kayem, right? See, Baruch Shamar B'Haya Olam Baruch Hu, Baruch Oseh V'Reshit, Baruch Omer Ve'Oseh. Those are shva naz, and then Baruch Gozer Kayem. Technically, okay, is there? As did many of us, right? How important those are is another question. There's also the Kamat Gadol and Kamat Katan, which isn't listed here, but the Kamat Gadol, the Kamat is the vowel that looks like a T, and usually it's pronounced ah, but sometimes, according to proper pronunciation, it's pronounced o. And that Kamat, ironically, even though it's called a Kamat Katan, a small Kamat, in the Koren Siddur is the bottom leg is lengthened, so it's actually bigger. So Kamat Katan is bigger. Hopefully that doesn't confuse you too much. That vowel is pronounced O. So, for example, at the end of Kedusha, L'dor v'dor nagid god lecha. These are just little pieces, technical pieces. Okay. Yes. There are rules. There are a lot of rules, and one can learn them if one really wants to. Yeah. There's a lot of rules, and and of course there's some dispute about the rules too. Okay. So moving on from the Baruch Shamar, again, these are just pieces that I want to show you. The translation, the translation of the prayers in the Koren Siddur that we're using is by Chief Rabbi Jonathan Sachs of blessed memory, and so that is another reason why Corin in general. He wrote this translation for the authorized daily prayer book of the United Kingdom, but it was incorporated into the Koren Siddurim as well. I personally think it's beautiful. I think many of us do. I think there's a lot to be said. There's a lot of, ink spilled on, why translations and how translations are done. We're not going to go into that right now, but I wanted to point out a couple of interesting pieces about that. The next thing where it says the custom is to sit, this is not a translation, this is just an instruction that I found when I first saw it. I said, wow, right? The same way, Becky, that you said about the the Kamat Katan, Shvanan, like, wow, I'd never heard this. So that is a note that is found in the Koren Siddur after Baruch, right? We start the main part of the tefila, Baruch Hashem HaMevorach, Baruch Hashem HaMevorach Le'olam Va'ed, and then it has this note. The custom is to sit from this point until the amidah, which you'll find in other Siddurim as well. Some version of those words that you'll see in other places. Since the predominant emotion of this section of the prayers is love rather than awe. And I read that. I said, what? It never occurred to me. We sit when the predominant emotion is love, right? Again, we can think about what this is introducing. The blessings of Kriyat Shema and the Shema itself. Shema is preceded by Ahavat Olam at Mariv and Ahava Rabbah in Shacharit. So this idea of and then Shema, right? The pasuk of Shema followed by the Ahavta et Hashem Elokecha, loving your God and thinking about that experience. So wow, that's I found that there's something very sweet and very meaningful about an instructional note that gives you something to think about as well. That's not just about do this, do that. It's about how you might think about it. That's in all the Koren Siddurim, by the way. We'll see a little bit more depth in that. The next line you'll see, listen, Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. That's Rabbi Sachs's translation of the Shema, of the pasuk of Shema, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Listen, as opposed to what do we expect to see? Hear, O Israel, right? But those who speak Hebrew know that the word Shema doesn't really mean hear, right? It doesn't. It means hearing in a different way. Right? It does sort of mean hear. Like listen might be lakshiv, but it also could be a command form. I don't remember if it's in the regular Koren Siddur or the Siddur. You can check me on it. He actually lists 7 different possible translations of the word Shema. Right? Like, what does it mean? Okay, there's a lot to think about. Right? Hear, O Israel. Right? I think about that in maybe, you'll forgive me for saying like a high church sort of way. Like I think of, well, or those who know, right, there's the History of the World Part 2 is on now, Hulu. So, right, so I think of Moses coming down the mountain, hear, O Israel, right? And listen, Israel has just a different, it feels more, to me, it feels more personal. It feels more connected. Again, it's a difference in translation. Is it right or wrong? Is hear, O Israel wrong? Absolutely not. That's not the point. It's a different one. Yeah.
There's a huge difference between hearing and listening.
For sure. Yes.
That's subtlety here that
Yeah.
I find interesting. It doesn't exist with other places.
Yeah. No. Again, I think there's a lot there to go on, and we could spend, again, as I said, we could spend hours just thinking about the translation of Shema. We're going to move on. I brought here again just a comparison of translations, right? The translation on the right side is the translation of the Atara, the first blessing of the middle section of the weekday amidah, which we don't really have in the Shabbat one, but I thought it was a good example. So that the one on the right side is the translation from the Art Scroll Siddur. You graciously endow man with wisdom and teach insight to a frail mortal. Endow us graciously from yourself with wisdom, insight, and discernment. Blessed are you, Hashem, gracious giver of wisdom. Okay, works. Right. The one on the left is the Rabbi Sachs translation. You grace humanity with knowledge and teach mortals understanding. Grace us with the knowledge, understanding, and discernment that come from you. Blessed are you, God, Lord, who graciously grants knowledge. Again, I don't even want to say anything else about it other than say, okay, it's different. I think it's just different. I think there's some sensitivity and subtlety to it. It's not a matter of right or wrong.
That's something I thought about for a long time. Almost every prayer book, and I use a variety of them, has a translation of that as knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
There is a huge difference between knowledge and wisdom.
Totally.
Wisdom is in short supply.
That's it, right?
Acquired, and I wonder which of those is correct. What is the Hebrew really trying to say?
I'm going to leave it to you to figure out for now. I'm not going to answer your question.
Translation.
I don't think it's a right. When you're talking about translation, there is as you said before, a lot of subtlety. There's a lot of deeper meaning. Again, this is, like I said, I can go for so long. The word, this is related more to Tanakh translation, right? The word Adam, right? Adam, right? In the beginning of the Tanakh, right? When you read the word Adam, you say, and then you read you read it as man. Okay, great. That's you understand it a particular way, right? But if you think about the Hebrew, you understand it. You notice that Adam has a almost complete connection to the word Adama, which means land. So there's a connection between man and land. That is totally gone, no matter how you translate it. There's no way to reproduce that subtlety without, explaining the joke, right? Without saying, well, by the way, in case you don't know, this is what it means, right? This is what the original Hebrew word means. So that's what you have to translate.
Does try, right? So
try. Yeah.
You get frustrated when the poetry is being translated. If the translator doesn't capture fonts and the reference in there, then you think they're a bad translator. But when the translator of the Torah or of the Siddur does it, we get all up in arms because we say they're editorializing. So it's actually really interesting.
They could
need to do it, right? There's all kinds of references to other things in there.
Totally.
But it feels bad, right? Like when I read Art School Shiva, might get pissed off. But like here, there's definitely editorializing.
There's definitely editorial, but also editorializing maybe is a little bit pejorative, right? I don't think it's necessary. It's not always editorializing. Sometimes it's just trying to represent it in a particular way. I brought that up. It happens to be that Rabbi Sachs did a translation of the Chumash before he passed away. The Tanakh was released, and they're working on a shul Chumash with the work that he did. But what they did was in this work was to put it in a footnote to say Adam and Adama have a resonance, right? Bracha, berech, and brecha, right? Bracha is a blessing. Berech is a knee, right? Birkayim, and brecha is a spring. Those three words are intimately connected, but in English they're not connected at all. But when we're seeing the Hebrew, and we might want to, it reminds us of those different resonances. Okay, as I pointed out, the prayer for Israel and Israel Defense Forces, that's why Corin. All these reasons I think are the essential reasons why Corin. Now why this Corin? If you turn over the page, why the Ani Tefila Shabbat Siddur? And so to give you some ideas, again, I can talk about this. I love this Siddur. I love both the weekday and the Shabbat ones. It really, I joke about the, there's that old commercial for the hair club for men. Like, I'm not just the president, I'm also a client, and they takes off his whatever, or the before and after picture. So I'm not just the person who works for Corin. I really love this Siddur particularly. And so what I'd like to do is, pretty briefly, to go over the sections that are in here, and the types of commentary, what distinguishes, and then some examples, and then we'll move on. The thing that distinguishes this Siddur, as I said before, this Siddur was originally created, the weekday version was created for high school students. It was quickly realized that people of all ages would benefit. There are Siddurim that were made, educational Siddurim for younger students, but this is a Siddur for like 13 to 95. As long as you can still read the words. Sometimes it gets a little small, so I apologize. But as long as our glasses, our progressive lenses are still working, so we can do it. And the idea you'll see on the front of the Siddur, and this says similarly on the weekday Siddur, says a Shabbat Siddur for reflection, connection, and learning. Idea being that there is a way of approaching tefillah that is not just about reading and reciting the words. There are a lot of approaches to making your tefillah, making your davening more meaningful. Some of it has to do with much more just understanding those words, the meanings of them. What Rabbi Goldman's attempted to do in this Siddur with the different types of commentaries is to bring things out that would help the prayer connect to the prayers, to help the mitpalel with his or her tefillah. Does that make sense? Right? And how do we do that? Through learning, through understanding, also through connection, and also through reflection. Right? Reflection, it's interesting for those who are sensitive again to the Hebrew. Lehit palel, the verb that we use for prayer, is a reflexive verb. It's a verb that it's something we do to ourselves. I think I actually may have taught like on Shavuot night a couple of years ago about something similar, about or a related topic. But like, what does that mean for us to pilel ourselves, right? Lehit palel. Again, there's some answers in the Siddur. There's some answers you can find a lot, but that's the idea of reflection, that tefillah can be not necessarily or not only about requests or beseeching of God, but also beseeching of ourselves. Also about thinking about ourselves and how the words we're saying and the things we're doing and the mitzvot we do can help us to improve ourselves, and perhaps through that gain a closer relationship to God. Right? Again, just to try to hit the point home, there's a lot of literature and a lot of interesting discussion about whether we can ask God for things. Right? I think many of us grew up with an approach to tefillah that is sort of the Santa Claus approach, which is, if I was a good boy and I write a nice letter to Santa, apologize for using this reference, right? Then maybe I'll get the bicycle that I wanted or the Xbox that I wanted or whatever. And maybe this is not about what God is going to give me, but what I'm going to do for myself. Okay, there's a lot here. Biur tefila, right? So, So the way the Siddur is laid out is that next to the words in either the Hebrew or the English, you will see one of four letters whenever the commentary has something to say, right? Four letters: B-I-H, H and A, right? Or in Hebrew, Bet, Ayin, Hey, or Aleph. So what are these, right? I'm just going to read Rabbi Goldman's descriptions and try to say something about them. Biur tefillah, right? Each one of these, right? So you can see it again, it's not on every word, but on any given page, he will have chosen to focus on one or two pieces. Biur tefillah. Biur tefillah helps in gaining a thorough understanding of the text and context of the prayers. It examines the micro understanding of a specific word or phrase in the text of the tefillah, as well as presenting a wider understanding of the historical background of the tefillah, its place in the context of the overall structure of the service. Such comments are noted in the text with a B or a bet. Biur tefillah is a micro approach, understanding the words. Now, there's more to that, which we'll see in the examples, but it's a very direct and looking at specific words or very small phrases. Okay, that's what Biur tefillah is trying to give us. Iyun tefillah explores the deeper meaning behind the tefillot, taking a broader approach to the text. It presents a macro understanding of the prayers, including philosophical and theological approaches to tefillah in general and the text in particular. Such comments are noted with the letter I or ayin. Iyun tefillah is a bigger picture, right? Here's a concept that we want to know more about. Okay, halakhot tefillah. This section ensures that one is aware of the ritual requirements surrounding the mitzvah to pray. These comments are interspersed throughout the Siddur, as well as concentrated in an appendix at the back, which focuses on the laws of daily prayer and changes that need to be made during the course of the year. Such comments are noted in the text with the letter H or Hey. We'll see when when you see the example, that with all of these, it's plus. It's not just law, but it's law plus. Meaning, is there something that this particular halakha or custom can teach us? Right, as much as possible. That's what Rabbi Goldman's approach. Finally, ani tefillah, which really is, I think, the flagship of the Siddur, and that's where it gets its name. The expressed aim of the ani tefillah sections is to encourage connection to the tefillot in a direct and personal way. It is hoped this will be achieved through encouraging the reader to consider the prayers in an experiential way, through inspiring and thought-provoking quotes and narratives, as well as through a process of personal creative thinking. The name for the section derives from a statement made by King David in Tehillim 109, which says, Va'ani tefillah. This could be translated as I pray, but it could also mean I am prayer. At its best, prayer is an extension of the person who says it. It is shaped by who you are and what thoughts, emotions, memories, moods, feelings, and expression you bring to it. The words of the Siddur then are not only to be taken literally, they are also signposts to help generate the range of thoughts and emotions and associations that reside within you on any given day. Think and feel beyond the words. These comments are noted in the text with an A or an Aleph. Okay, went to the second page, and I'm going to try to do this very fast because I'd like us to have a chance, to hear what Rabbanit Atara has prepared also. On the top, I think this might be out of order. No, I think we're okay. Okay. I'm not going to read this one on the top. The one on the top is an ani tefillah, but it relates to the prayer for the state of Israel. I think it's a gorgeous story, but it's another example both of the connection to Medinat Yisrael as well as the goal of the ani tefillah sections, right? But again, it's not related to amidah, so I don't want to read it now. What? Because yes, it is a little bit, but it's also because she talks about her brother who okay. I don't want to no politics. No politics, right. In any case, yes, a little bit ironic. It's so funny because I don't even think of this as being about the Supreme Court. I think this about it being when you read what she says with this letter that she writes. Okay, so again, I'll let you read that on your own. For those who might be looking at this on video, it is on the bottom of page, top of page what? No, sorry, no, but in the book, that story is on the bottom, page 395. Okay. So now you have okay, so first one, we have two of the comments of Biur tefillah. Again, I'm going to run through these. I'm going to try to give us context as much as possible. The first one is these are both from, excuse me, this one's from Musaf, from Shabbat Musaf, right? And this is from the word me'angeha, right? So, right, those who delight in it, right? Anybody recognize the word in me'angeha, the root, right? Oneg, right? Oneg Shabbat, the joys of Shabbat, those who delight in it. So the comment says, those who delight refers to those who equate Shabbat not with a sense of loss or handicap, but with actual gain and true delight. Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch gave us that comment, right? So the idea that Shabbat, that the joy of Shabbat, what this is referring to is someone who sees Shabbat not just as a list of restrictions of things you can't do, but somebody who actually gets joy and delight out of it. And so Rabbi Goldman's adds, and this is a sort of an example of what happens, and I tried to pick these as much as possible. He doesn't always add these bold-faced pieces, but when he does, I think those are the real gems of the Siddur. For you today, is Shabbat an intrusion or an infusion? They're not always so cute, but they are always very meaningful. Right? Is Shabbat intruding? Is the experience of Shabbat, the laws, the joys, the meals, is that an intrusion on your life or is it an infusion to your life? On the other side of that column, you can see page 344, which is from the Shachrit amidah, Hemdat Yamim Oto Karata, calling it the most cherished of days. Right? That this is again, this is a pasuk or a phrase from the Shabbat morning amidah. What a person does with this day can have an impact on the following week, for your actions generate a sense of blessing that is implanted within you. Create the opportunities for blessing today that you can take with you into the next week or into next week. So again, we're taking a small word, a word or a phrase, trying to understand what it means, right? And what it means is that's a loaded term, right? Like we were talking about with translation or editorializing. So what does this word or phrase mean in the biggest way possible, an expansive way? And then some sort of question or almost an activity, right? An action. Create the opportunities for blessing today that you can take with you into next week. How can this experience of Shabbat inform the week that is coming up, right? That I can learn. So that's Biur Tefillah, micro approach. I'm going to skip the left side on C, page 340, Iyun Tefillah, and go to the one on the bottom of the right side. Okay, again, this is talking about the beginning of the Shacharit Amidah, or the inside part of it, where it says, Yismach Moshe v'matnat chalko, Moses rejoiced at the gift of his portion, right? And an idea of connecting the gift to the gift of Shabbat. And so, again, there's one element on the left side. It says, at the same time, perhaps it's an echo of the tradition that the Torah was given on Shabbat. One can then understand Moshe Has Great Joy and the need for us to follow. Knowing Torah brings one joy. And then we ask, what does about this day generally gives you joy? How can you make the Shabbat into more of a day of joy? So again, we have here a more conceptual idea of what is Shabbat? What is this section trying to tell us about the experience of Shabbat, the experience of Shabbat historically, the experience of Shabbat in the Torah, as well as for us. On the back page, on the fourth page, this is from halakhot tefila, from the Baruch She'amar that we looked at earlier. So again, this is, I hope, what I was trying to say about halakha plus, right? The following is the opening blessing of Pesukei Zimra. If you're running out of time, you should minimally say this prayer before moving on to Ashrei. Okay, very nice. This is important to know that if you come to shul a little bit late and there's the essential pieces of Pesukei Zimra, right? I would argue, perhaps this is a shiur for another time. I would argue that that is not just about the time that I have, but the attention and the kavanah that I have. Meaning that Pesukei Zimra, the introductory stuff on Shabbat, is very long, and maybe what we might do is say, okay, what are the essential pieces that we have to do every Shabbat morning and every morning, and what are the pieces that maybe we could pick and choose? The congregation is going to do what it does, right? There's a matbea tefillah, there's a way in which the congregation does it. But for each of us individually, we're not necessarily obligated to say every word of Pesukei Zimra. I know I just got recorded saying that, so I apologize to those who disagree. But I think that's clear. I think it's a clear way of understanding it, and we know that because if you're late, you skip these things, right? There's an essential piece and there's extra, so you can learn from that. Okay, good. I'm moving on from that editorial comment. All right. But then look at what it says after that. If one understands the purpose of the different parts of Psukei de Zimra as being a single unit of praise that is designed to prepare us psychologically and spiritually for the amidah, then one can appreciate the fact that halakha deems it important that its recitation not be interrupted by unnecessary speech. Its identity as a single unit is indicated by the opening blessing we're about to recite, simmer concluding blessing at the end of Yishtabach, thereby making Psukei de Zimra one long blessing of praise. This is also the reason why during its recitation one may respond amen on hearing someone else's blessing, since amen to is considered a song of praise, something that cannot be said of extraneous conversation. That wasn't editorializing, right? But right, meaning we've learned a law here. We've learned that actually we've learned two laws. We've learned that we can skip everything after this until Ashrei if we need to, if we're running out of time. We've also learned that we're not supposed to talk during Psukei de Zimra. Right, but we haven't just learned that we're not supposed to. We've learned a possible reason why. A possible reason why this is done that way. Again, there's a lot. There are other possibilities, but maybe it helps to bring us meaning. Maybe it helps to be reminded of it when the rabbi shushes us when we're talking during Psukei de Zimra, right? Because maybe we need to be reminded that this is something we're supposed to be focused on in a particular way. Okay. Finally, as I said, I've left it for the end, and of course, I have the very short amount of time to say it. Two ani tefila pieces, and I chose both of them from the Modim prayer, which is on, you see 432 and 433. We say it in every amidah that we ever say, right? Shachrit, Mincha, Mariv, Musaf, holidays, weekdays, Shabbat, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. Every day we always say Modim. Modim anachnu lach. We are grateful. We are thankful. Right. That phrase and that concept appear in other places in the tefillah as well. But there's an entire blessing of the amidah that's dedicated to it. Right. So pretty important. And I think that it's actually a great way of framing how we might use the tefillah in an expansive way. Rabbanit Atara and I were talking about how for a lot of people, they think like the only things that they can change or add or express themselves in the amidah might be even on the weekdays. So I don't even know what we have on Shabbos and Yom Tov, but on the weekdays, the only time that we could do it would be during the Shema Kolenu, during the hear our voice, right? Maybe some people remember that when we say Atach Slach Lanu, maybe we can think about a sin we committed. When we say Rafa'in, we might have the name of something involved, but the rest of them we sort of like leave behind, perhaps. And that's what the ani tefillah, the weekday ani tefillah, sort of helps us bring out. But modim, gratitude, is something that we can and should have all the time and should think about. So here are two approaches, right? So there's a word, the phrase is al chayenu, for our lives. When was the last time you were truly thankful for just being alive? How might acknowledgement of this change the way you view today's challenges? I think, again, certainly as people grow older, we start to recognize the things that, maybe this didn't go so well. Maybe it was a rough day. Maybe this guy cut me off at a light. But we can say, okay, but I'm healthy. I'm safe. I have my life. I have a lot of blessings in my life, and so we can think about that. We can think about that in so many different ways. Right. And the different comments that Rabbi Goldman gives on all the different times we say modim help to bring that out. I'm going to read the story and then leave us with that, because this is even more expansive or another way of doing it. And hopefully I'll manage not to get choked up as I read to the end of it, because I love this story. This is from somebody named Barbara Glantz. This story, I don't know who she is. I think she's an educator, but she's a speaker. I don't know if something, I Googled, I could not find her. I mean, I found a lot of them, but I don't know which one is which. So, okay. One of these days I'll ask Rabbi Goldman for his source. In my speeches and workshops, I sometimes ask my audience to shut their eyes and think about someone who, at some point in their lives, has rekindled their inner light. It's always a profound experience for everyone as they remember the joy they received from being appreciated by someone when they needed it most. After one session, a gentleman thanked me for creating a new awareness. He had immediately thought of his 8th grade literature teacher who had really made an impact on his life. He planned to track her down and thank her. I failed. A few months later, he called me to say that he had written his teacher. She had gotten his letter, and the following week she sent him her response. Dear John, you will never know how much your letter meant to me. I am 83 years old, and I am living alone in one room. My friends are all gone, and my family's gone. I taught for 50 years, and yours is the first thank you letter I've ever gotten from a student. Sometimes I wonder what I did with my life. I will read and reread your letter until the day I die. He was very emotional on the phone. He said she was always the one we talk about at every reunion. She was everyone's favorite teacher. We loved her, but no one ever told her. We do not thank enough, not the people around us who do good things for us, nor God who is forever giving us things, especially the smaller things that we take for granted, but we never tell him. The Jew takes this opportunity every day. Take it now. Think of something that you have otherwise taken for granted in your life and say, Modim, we thank you. I hope that gives us an idea of what we're looking at in the Siddur when we use it, and I hope it brings you some understanding and hopefully some kavanah as well.
Yeah.
I use up a lot of your time. I'm sorry. Mr. Rogers.
Okay. All right. So yes, really thank you. That was the Siddur. I think you said that once you listen, once you understand what's in here, we're never going to daven it anymore. We're just going to read. There's that. Okay. So I am going to take you through a little bit of a different journey, not about Corin, because I now I know about Corin, but just kind of a smorgasbord of things about the Shimona Esrei, amidah, the silent prayer. Those are all words for the Shimona Esrei. But before we do that, I want to take a few steps back and a little bit of time we have and think about prayer. So I was thinking that the next thing we're going to run, which I hope you'll tell your friends about, and we'll all join together here on March 29th, is we're having an event. We're going to talk about the Seder. And it's not just our shul that's having an event like that. So many shuls or schools have events. So you can go, there's like ones on Zoom. Already now, it's like I just joined a WhatsApp group where I can have, an idea a day about the Seder. One night, I mean, here's two, but in Israel, it's one. And I was thinking about that and I was like, yeah, of course we're going to prepare for the Seder. It's such a special night. You don't want to just go through the Haggadah and zoom through it. And yet for tefila, which we theoretically are supposed to do 3 times a day, right? When's the last time I thought about the Siddur? When's the last time? Do shuls often have courses on prayer? Or the Haggadah happens every year. A lot of us can do it by heart. And yet every year we're going back and trying to explore it. And we also know it from Parshat HaShavua. We know the story of the Exodus. So I wanted to ask you why you think we approach prayer as kind of something that we don't necessarily revisit, while other things, the Parshat HaShavua, the weekly Torah portion, we revisit all the time. I don't know. What do you think?
Our team, liturgy is the same. I have teased my friend over there a couple of times over the years about so sad that the jet plane is going slowly.
Yeah.
And I often wonder, maybe we're not just how this routine,
Right.
we do.
So it becomes part of our routine that we kind of don't question. I think you're right. There's an emphasis on the routine of it and less on something else. But
It's like do or how fast can you dive? Some years ago, I was in a retreating camp, and there was a young man saying Kaddish.
yeah,
Young man. Most of the people in the crowd were not. And I said, try to read slowly. So, because people are going to make a real effort in the prayer, because they really wanted it. Couldn't do it.
Right, right. We almost, if we slow down, we lose our momentum. Right. So I think, right, we have a problem where we go very quickly, but there's something you're also saying there's a routine. So what would happen if we were supposed to do it 3 times a day? So it almost has to be routinized.
Right.
So
The lazy ones.
yeah,
Right, like it's hard for me to tell the person who shows up 3 times a day, you just go slower
right,
and pay more attention, but they're like, dude, I showed up.
right, right, right.
Where have you?
Right, 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 right. So I think there's something about, right, if you do it all the time, then of course, like, we're not gonna think about it.
To piggyback on that,
Yeah.
it loses its specialness, right? When you don't do something so often, then Pesach is like, oh yeah, I love that. I haven't sung those songs in a year.
Mm-hmm.
But when you do something every day, it becomes routinized and less special.
Yeah,
Like
Yeah.
in our daily lives, you don't see somebody for a long period of time and then you get to see them. It's amazing, but if you see them every day, it's like, oh, how.
right. And yet the true relationships we have are usually with people that we see every day. They're much more fraught, but they're much more fraught, right? And I think there's a connection there. The fraughtness, the conflict, those are part of creating rich relationships, which maybe is our relationship to tefillah. It's different. Yeah.
I mean, it's sort of like driving
Yeah.
automatic pilot. You're not thinking about 99% of the trip. You just leave and arrive there. You don't really use
Yeah.
your mind to think about what happened. So it's not a question of questioning or anything like that. It's just like a song that you sing in your head.
Right.
You've heard 1,000 times.
So I love that you said that because I remember, well, I think it was from like Aish, which is a resource which people can use. But I remember reading this thing and they said davening or tefillah or prayer is not like driving a car. And I think it's because it's so close. You think that you learn it once. So we learned, I was privileged to learn how to pray to daven when I was very little. So I can say the words, right, without even thinking. And yet I treat it like I'm driving a car. I learned how to drive when I was 17, 18. And while, you don't go and like practice how to drive a car, once once you get good at it, hopefully you're good and you don't need to revisit your pamphlet, right? And yet with tefillah, they were saying we take the understandings that we were taught in maybe 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, and we think that it's still going to move us now. And yet that's impossible for us to do. And so I also want to thank people for whom tefillah is new, that they're pushing us to kind of say, no, like as an adult, I want to know how to learn this as an adult, which we all should learn how to do this as an adult. And I think a lot of us are relying on our, how we learned it as a kid. And of course, it's not meaningful for us because it was introduced to us when we were very little. Speaking of children, I'll tell 2 stories about one of my child's children. I'm not going to mention which one it was, but we lived in Israel for 3 years. And when you learn tefillah in Israel and you're Hebrew speaking, you know what they mean. And while the tunes are the same, they are said a little bit differently. So one of my daughters, when she started SAR this year, she said, act like babies when they sing Adon Olam. They're just like, Adon Olam. And I was like, you're right. It's so funny because for her, it's like you're saying Adon Olam, like the person who's, the master of the universe, Asher Malach, that is like the king of all of us. You're saying something, Hashem li v'lo ira, Hashem is with me and I should not be afraid. How are you just saying that? Just clapping your hands. And she's saying it's ridiculous. And I said, it is ridiculous. And I'm sorry. And so that same daughter, she really has connected to tefillah and helped me in some ways. I was recently sitting with her on the couch and she was getting teary-eyed. And I said, what's going on? Is something happening? And she said, you know what? Sometimes I just get teary-eyed. And I know sometimes that can mean that there could be something else going on. And we check those things out. And I said, when does it happen that you get teary-eyed? And she said, a lot of times during tefillah, during davening in school, I just start to cry and I don't know why. And I said, I think that's your neshama. I think it's your soul. And I don't know whether it is, and I don't know that it's not. But I remember when I was a young child, around her age, I also sometimes would sit in tefillah in school, and I would just feel tears coming up. I don't know if anybody else has that memory. I remember just feeling a deep sense of loneliness. And I told her that, and I said, I think it's our souls looking for a place to be. Because usually we kind of want to ignore them, but children know that our souls exist and they're looking for a place. And I said, the tefillah is where they're supposed to be. See if you can maybe try to find a home for your soul. And Heschel, actually in his essays on prayer, describes prayer being a home for our soul. And it's very kind of highfalutin. I'm not saying I understand it, but I think children do. And what I was thinking about this class and what we do and how we pray, I think what we do as children, I think they have a desire. They understand the need to pray. They're like, I want to talk to God. He's there. He's real. And we teach them about the tefillot and it makes sense. And we say, I don't, whether we teach them what it means or maybe we give them a little bit of an understanding. And I think as we grow up, we lose our childlike connection to our souls, but we keep our childlike understanding to the prayer. So we're totally lost, right? If we could keep, right? So we almost have to take we have to go back to the soul work of the child, but reach back to kind of what our grown-up minds can tell us. And it's very hard. And I don't think that it's something that you learn once and then are done. I think it's something that you revisit and maybe you focus on one prayer and the rest of it, and then you focus on another prayer. And maybe at one point in your life, something means something to you and the next day it doesn't. And I think that's part of the practice, right? I think a lot of us who are professionals, there is a sense of professional development. And I think we have to do the same thing towards our prayer. We can't do it every day. And one of the things I want to highlight in the next few minutes we have is this tension between sustainability and being meaningful, right? I think clearly, if you just look at how we practice tefillah, there's a huge focus on it being sustainable and being routinized, right? And we're going to see that we kind of prize that over the meaning. And yet, in order to infuse it with some meaning, we need to kind of take some time aside. So that's great that we're doing it right now. So the first source, I didn't number my pages, so if you just flip the first thing, there's one parak of Tehillim which I love, which is Membet 42 in Psalms, and it has it describes kind of a thirst for God, and the Hebrew is ka'ayal ta'arog alafike mayim, just like a ayal, which we translate as a ram, but we don't know exactly what kind of ram it is, but it's a hind ta'arog alafike mayim. Ta'arog, here the English is crying for water. Kei nafshi ta'arog elecha Elokim. So my soul yearns for you, God. I don't know how Corin translates ta'arog, but it actually only appears 3 times in all of Tanakh. Here, and then once in Joel, which is a book that we don't but that we can learn, but it's not often read. But this is really the only time, so we don't necessarily know what it means, but it's a thirst. It's like and the ayal is somebody who doesn't have such great access to water. And if you read about the Tehillim, there are people who say that it's the person who wrote it, they imagine was in the mountains or kind of those sources of water up in North Israel. If you've been to the Harmon, so you kind of see a lot of mountains and it's hard to find the water. And you imagine those ayalot, I don't know if it would be ayalot, right, are going and looking for water. That is how we are thirsty for God, right? We want to so that's how I imagine me towards tefillah. It's not that I know where the water is. It's not that I can always feel so spiritual or feel God, but I want to want. But I want to kind of imagine my soul being thirsty, trying to look around where it is. Most of the time, I probably won't find it. But this parak of Tehillim, it's well sung. There's a Jamaica song that I love that does help me kind of think about what does it mean to approach God, to approach prayer. And so sometimes we're going to say our prayers and just say them routinized very quickly, right? We're not going to pay attention to what we're saying. Maybe we don't know what we're saying because it's in Hebrew. Maybe we're saying it in English, which is okay, actually, very clearly okay in the halakha that you can pray in English or whatever language you want to pray in. But a lot of times, even if we're going to say it in our mother tongue, even Israelis, right? A lot of times they just say it like, right? Because you can't think about it all the time. It's very heavy. So I love the next source, which is a quote from Rabbi Yehuda Amital, who was the Rosh Yeshiva, he was the head, one of the starters and founders of the yeshiva in Yeshivat Har Etzion, which is the yeshiva in the Gush, in Alon Shvut, and he founded it with Rav Aaron Lichtenstein. He was a Holocaust survivor. He died, I guess, how many years ago now? I don't know. What? Around 10, I think around 10 years ago. So he says this in his book, which is the Haaretz Natan Livnei Adam. It was originally in Hebrew, was translated into English. And he says, like a mother who enjoys listening to the babbling of her infant, so as it were, God enjoys listening to our prayers. Can there be any greater joy than this? Someone is hearing us, ready to listen. And so imagine that, we obviously want to know what we're saying and have some sort of focused moment. But I know I have a baby and I know a lot of us are around babies. When you hear that little voice babbling, there's really nothing more precious than that. And to imagine us as being God's children, yeah, sometimes we're just babbling like like a jet plane or wherever we are, but God's listening and he loves it, right? He loves it. And I think he wants to hear our voice talking to him. And I think it's true. Again, God never told me this, but I think there's a way that we could kind of think about that and introduce that into our prayer. So We're going to take the next like 10 minutes and talk about Shimona Esrei, and I want to leave some time for questions. Shimona Esrei means 18 blessings. We know there's 19. Okay, so we can kind of talk about why that is, maybe a little bit. But realize that on Shabbat and Yom Tov, we say less, right? So there's like the beginning that is the same in all of them, and the end that is the same in all of them, but the middle chunk is different. And is the same on Shabbatot, but it's different. Yeah, but it's different, is the same on weekdays, but changes with the holidays and with Musa. Okay. But I want to go to the next source and talk about, because we talked about a little bit of, and there, I just want to mention, just I said it before, that the Shimona Esrei can be the amidah, it could be standing still, which means standing still. It could be the Shimona Esrei. The rabbis in the Talmud call it tefila. Like that is the essence of tefila. That is when you're really talking to God by yourself, right? We repeat it, which we could talk about another time why we repeat it together, right? But it really is that is the prayer that we're talking about. And I was recently talking to Adina Steinberg, and she said that it's interesting. She teaches in middle school and SAR. She said when you get to the Shimona Esrei, the kids can be talking straight through davening, but when you get to that time where you're kind of taking some time to be quiet, they're kind of quiet. Like even if they're not davening, they get it. And we kind of create this humdrum of people like schmoozing, maybe like schmoozing to God, saying prayers, maybe skipping some things. And then we get to this kind of quiet together. I know I saw Rabbi Goldman says, in my session, I asked everyone to close their eyes and think of something. That's what I imagine Shimona Esrei is supposed to be like. We're kind of all together in a room, closing our eyes or reading from a book and saying something quietly together, which has a lot of power in it, right? It has a lot of meditative power. And I think, for us to kind of think about what's going on. So if you look at the third source, I'm not going to read them inside, but the first one says that it's a question: should you have kavanah? Should you have intention? Do you have to pay attention, or could you just be babbling? And the halakha straight throughout kind of says, yeah, you should. And if you don't, you should say it again. If you don't have intention when you're saying Shemona Esrei, if you're kind of just glazed over and saying it, you didn't do the thing, right? You have to say something. And the Shulchan Aruch is kind of saying, yeah, you really should have kavanah. The Shulchan Aruch is a later source, right? It's kind of a compilation of all of halakha, trying to give us, it's a amidah set table, trying to give us kind of the practical halakha, what you should do. And I said, especially for the beginning, if you didn't or glazed over for most of it, but the first few brachot you didn't have intention for, you got to say it again. And then the Rama, who was Rabbi Moshe Has, who was writing a similar gloss, right? Trying to codify halakha at the same time as the Shulchan Aruch. They decided to combine forces. Amazing. They were like, let's actually just have one book. And he wrote a gloss, and he wrote with the Ashkenaz custom. And he says, nowadays we don't repeat things because of lack of kavanah, because chances are, if you repeated it, you also wouldn't have kavanah. So then, like, there's no end for that. And so just don't repeat it. And I think again, we see this tension. We're like, yeah, you should try, but we understand the reality is you're doing this 3 times a day, or even once a day, or even once a week. Frankly, chances are you're probably not going to have kavanah, and they're prizing us doing the thing instead of, that ideal. Yes.
So I just want to comment on what you're saying.
Yeah, please.
Kavanah is not all or none.
True.
There's a continuum.
Yes.
Some days you might get a D plus. Other days you might have like a B plus.
Right.
Where do you draw the line?
Yeah, I think that's a good, right. When we didn't define kavanah, what does it actually mean? Does it mean that you know what you're doing, that you have some sort of awareness? Does it mean that you understand every word? Does it mean that you're doing introspection? I don't know. And I think that's a good point, right? So, but what if it's at the bare minimum? You're actually just thinking about what you're making for dinner or a sports game or whatever you're doing.
Right.
Still, you don't repeat it, but not great, right? Right. Even if you get a 0.
Could be interesting to a lot of people see that and say, okay, well, we don't repeat it. We probably won't have kavanah anyway. But what it doesn't say is that we are able to stop trying.
Right.
Maybe we still have an obligation to try to have kavanah. If we don't make it, we get the D plus. Okay, what are you going to do? We don't have to repeat it, but maybe we can at least.
So I'll just make one quick comment. What I pray for is kavanah.
Right.
Seriously,
It's amazing.
When I pray, I'm hoping that I can muster the resolve, the kavanah, the intention to do whatever I'm doing,
Right.
with full mind and full heart.
Right.
And a lot of times that's not easy to muster because you
Right.
that.
Right. Yeah, that's beautiful.
So it raises the whole point about why we repeat the Shimona Esrei
Right. So I'll address it briefly, meaning there's two reasons that are kind of that float around. One is that it used to be that people didn't have Sidurim. We didn't have, right, before they could print Sidurim, you had to know them by heart or you had to say them, or people didn't read Hebrew. So we gathered together. So there might have been a silent amidah, but we relied on the chazan to say it for everybody, right? So here we have a repetition that's to catch the people who didn't have a proper tefillah for a myriad of reasons, or it can be because we believe in having a prayer like the personal amidah, we also pray as a community. Right? We also pray as a community together in that form. And there are halachic differences. There are people who believe that it's tefillah hatzibor, right? That it's tefillah of everybody, believe that therefore you should treat it in the same mannerisms that you treated the amidah, the personal prayer, and therefore you should stand with your feet. You should stand up, you should have your feet together for most of it, or ideally, right? So there's all these, there are slight differences. So if you notice in shul, there are people who stand during the Chazan's repetition. It's because that is like, it was popularized by Rav Soloveitchik, who thought that it was kind of this communal prayer that should be treated like the individual prayer, that as Jews we pray as individuals and as a community. I want to mention one other halakha, which I think comes up, in the sanctuary a lot. I mean, I notice it as somebody who is also trying to help people during shul, or trying to greet people. The next halakha that comes up in Brachot that has this very famous, kind of, you might hear this a lot, that says, Rabbi Yochanan says, who is a ben olam haba? Somebody who is somech geula l'tefila. And here's talking about Arvit in Mariv, but it also applies to Shachrit. Geula is the Gaal Yisrael. It's the bracha that we say right before Shimona Esrei. We say this Gaal Yisrael thing, right? We talk about the Geula, Michamocha. We're talking about we're talking about Sur Yisrael Geula. We're talking about the Exodus, right? And then we got to go straight into the amidah to Shimona Esrei, and we're not allowed to have a break between those things. So a lot of times the Chazan will actually say it quietly, because even saying Amen might make an interruption. So we want to make sure that nobody's even saying Amen. And also we say Hashem Svatai Tivtach, right? That's considered part of tefillah. There's actually at Mincha, there's another pasuk that you can say, which you can look at. I'm not going to go to your Siddur. And that actually, we only say at Mincha because we don't have those pasukim, but in Mariv and in Shachrit, we want to make sure that we are juxtaposing the redemption to tefillah. Why is that? There's a bunch of answers given, but it is something about seeing God, as who has redeemed us from Egypt, and somebody who was active in our lives, that we still see as active in our lives, that we're kind of are seeing us in the realm of history as part of God's people, and therefore we want to make sure that there's no break in between those things. And there's like I always get a little anxious, like what happens if something happens? I'm going to break that. I'm not going to be in a ben olam haba, but it's very much kept and very much live. Just to turn around, I'm going to do these outside. The next source, Shulchan Aruch 95, it talks about the position that you're supposed to be with your feet together, which I'm sure we might notice, and it's supposed to be so you're imitating angels, okay? And then we also, you might notice, there's a custom to walk back 3 steps and walk forward 3 steps, right? So really the first step is that you're supposed to walk forward 3 steps because you want to kind of enter into some sort of conversation or into a different space of prayer. So why do you walk back? Became the custom, right, to walk 3 steps back. The assumption is that if you already are in a place of prayer, you don't necessarily need to walk back, but you're supposed to not do it. Like a lot of times I learned that you're supposed to go like, Hashem Svatai Tivtach Lefi Ageti Hilatecha. You're not supposed to do that. That's like too routinized. You're supposed to take 3 steps back, kind of backing away from your former stance while you're saying those psukim, like those tefilot, the Elohim, Baruch Hu, while the Chazan is doing that, you take 3 steps back. And then in your own when you start your own prayer, then you take 3 steps forward, to kind of take a step back from what's going on. And then I think, kind of gesture to yourself that you're entering into a different type of space. And then another thing is that what about interrupting, right? What happens if someone needs you? So there's a lot of fun conversations in the Gemara about what kind of thing you could interrupt your tefillah for. They say if there's a non-poisonous serpent wrapped around your leg, you're not supposed to interrupt your tefillah. Okay, but so they take it very seriously. On the other hand, there's the Gemara that I brought you here. It says if a not Jewish king who might kill you comes and says hi to you, or really won't understand during Shimona Esrei, you should respond, right? But if it's a Jewish king, he'll understand. But there are conversations in the halakha about what happens if there's a child, right? What happens if a child needs you? What happens if you can't have kavanah? Now, they prize kavanah. They want you to have kavanah. So if you're in a situation where you can't focus anymore, you're allowed to kind of pause or motion. They even talk about if someone's waiting for you for chazan's repetition, you can motion for them to go on, because that's also a lot of pressure. They have to go quickly. So there are halakhot to look at, and I'll tell you where you can find them about kind of staying still. But you actually even though you're not supposed to move your place, if there's a lot going on around you, you could move to a different corner. That is something you're allowed to do. But you're not supposed to walk in front of somebody who's in the middle of prayer. So, but for some reason, let's say there's a bunch of kids who kind of come around you, you can go to a quieter corner even during your Shimona Esrei. The next thing is on the bottom of the page, which is the Rambam, laws of prayers. The Rambam seems to be, I kind of want to talk a little bit about, and that's going to lead us to the next conversation, which I'll also try to quickly. What are we bound by the words of the prayers, right? Meaning, when do these come about, or can we add to them? Who wrote them? Where did they come from? And the Rambam, if you read, I didn't bring you the source. If you read his halakhot tefila, he seems to be of the opinion that it's really ideally we would all be kind of saying our own spontaneous prayer, maybe in some sort of unified structure, but we would be composing it on our own, but we can't do that. We have to be sustainable, and therefore we have the words. But therefore, the Rambam says that you really could, in every single section of the amidah of the Shimona Esrei, you can add in your own tefillah, right? So he explains, if somebody's sick, you add it into Rofei Cholim, which we do. But also, if you want to talk about, if you're nervous about the judges in Israel, you can talk about that in Hashiva Shoftenu, like the Rabbi mentioned. All these, there's time in every single prayer, according to the Rambam, every single section, you can be adding in your own words and your own tefillot that are along the topics. They're kind of guideposts for us to talk about our own personal tefillot. There is a specific space that you see in Shema Kolenu. I think the Corin mentions that you're supposed to enter your own tefillah, the Shema Kolenu prayer, but really it could be in any prayer, right? And any of them. And then that begs the question: when did these prayers become a thing? Right? When were they written? Right? When did Shimon Esrei come about? Because what are we really contending with? Right? How ancient and how old is this? And the answer is, we don't really know who wrote them. Right? The oldest kind of full siddur that we have is from the 9th century. There's a Rav Sadia Gaon. There's also a different Gaon. I don't remember. Okay, yes, I have it here. There is for the Amram Gaon, and there also is the Machzor Victory, which was from the kind of Rashi's Chevra that was in the 1100s. So we have, and those are all kind of those are similar. Those are, I think, exactly the same as our Siddur is today. But we do know that the Shimon Esrei, or the concept of having the 18 prayers and the subjects of them, is very old. So if you look at this Gemara Megillah, we have this guy Shimon Hapakuli. And this is the only time he's mentioned. Like, we don't know where he doesn't appear anywhere else in the Talmud, but he has this very important job where it says that he arranged the 18 blessings before Rabbi Gamliel. Right, and that's when Yavne. So Rabbi Gamliel was dealing with a post, kind of the Beit HaMikdash was just destroyed, and he is the Nasi. He's heading the Beit Midrash in Yavne. Right, this is around the year 70. And he added them on. And then Rabbi Yochanan says, wait a second, we thought it was even older than that. We thought that it was, from the time of the Nevi'im and the Anshe Knesset Hagdola. So the Gemara says, okay, it must be that like kind of they had it and then people forgot it, and then Shimon Hapakuli kind of rearranged them. Now that could be what happens, but a lot of scholars say no, that's probably not what happens. But we are seeing that when the Gemara talks about the Shimona Esrei, it refers to these 18 or 19 brachot, and they are the same that we had today. We don't have the text, but it talks about the bracha for healing the sick, or the bracha for granting us knowledge. It is obviously the structure is very old, right? I'm even talking about like pre-Talmud, right? Older than the year 70. And yet they were kind of, I think, trying to piece together. So in its final form that we have today, it probably was a compilation of different texts and different prayers that were said. The oldest one of which is which most people say was actually said during when they were giving sacrifices. But there are some things that I think there is something that we do know, and this is kind of just with all that, kind of all that background there. But Gamliel, in the late 1st century, he created, kind of institutionalized the amidah, and it's 19. Kind of, he was the one who really said, "This is what you're going to say, and this is how you're going to say it, and the order," but probably not the full text that we have today. And the creation was a critical part of the rabbinic response to the theological challenge of not having a temple anymore. So if you look at the Shimona Esrei, you kind of are seeing that they are struggling with the fact that we don't have sacrifices anymore, and we're going to have this form of institutionalized prayer. Actually, the Jews were actually the only, I think they were the first religion to have a sense of prayer that didn't have any sort of sacrifices, any sort of ritual attached to it. So we want to make sure that we're not abandoning God, that God's not abandoning us. And the Gemara is full of this struggle of kind of, what does it mean to pray without a temple? What does it mean to pray without sacrifices? And they very carefully curated this institution of 3 times a day of prayer. There's more to say about that, which I'm not going to include right now. Now, the question is, how do you approach prayer? What does it mean? And what does it do? And I think that there's different ways to think about it, but I want to kind of, in the next 2 minutes, I'm going to take longer. One of the things that means a lot is Rav Avi Weiss, who we have his book. He kind of arranges them in some sort of, in the 18 blessings, in some sort of trajectory of thought that you're supposed to have every day, 3 times a day. And he says, we have the first 3 brachot, which are we have the first section and the last section, which are uniform. But the weekday amidah, the weekday Shimona Esrei, has a bunch of brachot, which I don't have time to go through right now, but I could pass this around. He says the first 3 brachot, which are about, getting us, making sure we have knowledge, and doing teshuva, and when we bang our chest, he's saying that's about some sort of self-evaluation. Who am I? What do I know? And where am I? And then the next thing, we're asking God to kind of see our struggles, to heal us. And then the Baruch Aleinu, he says, is really it's not about kind of Eretz Yisrael. He said it's about your own prosperity. It's making sure that you physically are okay in the world. And only then can you start talking about the community, because first we really worry about ourselves, which is very human. And then we kind of do a Shema Koleinu, making sure we're heard, which I thought was very powerful. And the last thing, which I don't want to go through with you, is there's an amazing scholar, Rabbi Dr. Eli Kaunfer, who he wrote his dissertation on tefila. And he has a different way of approaching tefillah, which I think can appeal to a lot of us, but is not necessarily a way you can approach tefillah all the time. Because he's not the only one, insists that the tefillah is made up of biblical allusions, of psukim. And if we could, and he has a very long dissertation, which is available. I can email it to you. Or he says that they're all alluding to different parts of the Tanakh, and you can learn them almost as much as you learn the Haggadah, or you would learn a midrash, and they're supposed to evoke meanings and different things within us as we're davening. So one of the things I'll give a short one, is we have the word Magen Avraham, right? That's in the beginning. What does it mean to be a shield of Abraham? And there's a lot, he's not the only one who says it, right? So what does that mean? And so there's one time where Hashem says to Avraham, Anochi Magen Lacha, right? I put it for you, your source. God, Magen Lacha, right? It's only one time. So Rabbi Eli Kaunfer says this must be what it's referring to. That scene where God says, I'm going to protect you to Abraham, because it's Magen Abraham. And what is that conversation that God is having with Abraham at that time? Abraham had gone after God without knowing who he was or where he was going. And he had done all the things, and he did a battle. And then God keeps on saying, I'm going to give you kids. Your name's going to be great. And then Abraham hadn't really talked to God. And the first thing he says, he's like, hey, listen, how do I know that this is all going to come true? Because I don't have children. I'm old. I don't have kids. And he says, how do I know this is all going to happen? And God says, don't worry, I'm going to protect you. Right. And so there's a lot you can do with that, but you can say we're kind of supposed to think of Abraham, where first of all, you're allowed to ask things of God. You're allowed to be vulnerable. You're allowed to say, I don't really know how this is going to work. And that's a mindset that we can take with us as we enter into the Shimona Esrei. Is not one of like, I get this, right? God's real and everything's like, not the Santa Claus image, but kind of be like, I don't know, like, I know I learned, and I know there's a lot of things I'm supposed to be doing, but I don't know where this is supposed to come from. And we're allowed to come to God with kind of that being our background, and that being, that's the God of Abraham, is the God who listens to us, who protects us, even when we're not sure where that protection is coming from. So that is kind of one approach where and Rabbi Eli Kempfer does this for, I think, most of tefillah. And he's continuing to do it. It's stuff that you can find on the internet. And in your last page of your source sheet, and I will email these out, I gave you some sources, some things that I like. Their first three are books by Corin. So you can order. First one is Shimona Esrei by Ezra Bick. And it's very classic. I think you can also get most of it on the virtual Beit Midrash. Yeah, so you can buy the book or you can get it online. Then there's this book here, Holistic Prayer, which that's from Avi Weiss, which is a little bit less academic, but I find very meaningful. And then there's Prepare My Prayer, which I don't know.
Yeah.
It's
a little bit, it's not about the amidah, it's about an attitude for tefillah by Rabbi singer.
Yeah. And I have this book, which is very academic and dry, but I like it. It is Jewish Liturgy, A Comprehensive History. It's by Ismail Ellenbogen. And then if you want to know what the laws of prayer, there's this book, which is in Hebrew originally, and Rav Melamed, Pnei Halacha. Rav Melamed really wants his halacha books to be very accessible to everybody. So if you go on this link, you can find all of his halakhot in English, and they're very clear and footnoted. Now, again, like any halachic work corpus, sometimes they leave out other opinions. So that is something you should, it's just a caution that he's good, but
even if he doesn't put it there, like even if it's not his like preferred thing.
Yeah. Right. But it's impossible, like just with translations, to put everything in there. So Rav Melamed is saying and he's very good, and right. So it's kind of like our modern day Shulchan Aruch, and it's available online in English, and it's a great resource. So for all the halakhot tefillah, you can also go there. And with that, I think we can go. We're done. Yeah. All right. Close it. I'm gonna stop the recording.